The Baltic Sea has quietly become one of the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints in the modern world. Beneath its cold waters lies an invisible network of fiber optic cables, energy pipelines, power connectors, and digital arteries that keep Europe alive every single second of the day. Most people never think about these cables because they cannot see them. Yet nearly every internet search, financial transfer, military communication, and government operation depends on them. According to NATO, almost 99% of global internet traffic travels through undersea cable systems. That means the modern world is not truly connected by satellites in space, but by fragile cables lying silently at the bottom of the sea. And now, those cables are becoming targets. What happened in the Baltic Sea was not viewed by European security officials as a simple maritime accident. It was interpreted as another warning sign that the era of hybrid warfare has fully entered European waters. The severing of 2 fiber optic cables under the Baltic Sea triggered alarm across Europe because the region is no longer dealing with isolated incidents. Officials increasingly believe they are witnessing a coordinated pattern of pressure, intimidation, infrastructure disruption, and strategic testing carried out by hostile actors. In this environment, every drifting ship, every unexplained engine malfunction, and every damaged cable immediately raises suspicions of sabotage. The Baltic Sea itself has enormous strategic importance. It is surrounded largely by NATO members including Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states. For years, analysts even referred to it informally as a NATO lake. Yet one important exception remains. Russia still maintains a powerful strategic footprint through Kaliningrad, its heavily militarized exclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania. From there, Russia projects naval influence, intelligence operations, electronic warfare capabilities, and strategic pressure deep into the region. At the same time, China has increasingly looked toward the Baltic as part of its wider maritime ambitions. Beijing may be geographically distant from Northern Europe, but economically and strategically, it wants influence across global shipping lanes and critical infrastructure systems. Chinese-linked companies operate ports, shipping firms, logistics chains, and maritime infrastructure throughout Europe. Western security officials now fear that economic access could gradually transform into strategic leverage. That fear intensified dramatically when Swedish authorities detained a Chinese-linked vessel suspected of involvement in cable sabotage operations. The decision by Sweden shocked many observers because it represented a major escalation in Europe's willingness to confront suspicious maritime activity directly. Swedish officials reportedly suspected that the vessel may have been connected to damage inflicted on critical undersea telecommunications infrastructure. This was not merely a technical issue involving internet cables. European governments viewed the situation through the lens of national security. If critical communications infrastructure can be disrupted without consequences, then Europe's digital backbone becomes permanently vulnerable. The detention also carried symbolic significance because Sweden had only recently become a member of NATO. For decades, Sweden maintained military non-alignment, but Russia's invasion of Ukraine transformed Swedish strategic thinking completely. Stockholm no longer believes that neutrality alone guarantees security. The Baltic Sea is now treated as an active front line in the wider confrontation between Russia and the West. That is why Sweden's seizure of the Chinese-linked vessel sent a message far beyond the Baltic region. It signaled that NATO members are becoming less willing to tolerate suspicious behavior near critical infrastructure. As concerns escalated, NATO launched a major surveillance initiative known as Baltic Sentinel. The mission aims to increase monitoring of vital maritime infrastructure, including undersea cables, pipelines, communication routes, and power connectors, maritime patrol aircraft, naval frigates, drones. Underwater surveillance systems and intelligence assets were deployed to watch the Baltic Sea around the clock. NATO's message was straightforward. The alliance wanted hostile actors to understand that suspicious activity would no longer occur unnoticed. The vessel at the center of the controversy reportedly attracted attention through unusual maritime behavior patterns. Maritime tracking data indicated irregular slowdowns, drifting movements, and unexplained engine issues occurring dangerously close to sensitive infrastructure locations. Analysts began noticing that these incidents repeatedly happened near undersea cables and pipelines. Each individual malfunction might have been explained away as coincidence. However, the cumulative pattern appeared increasingly suspicious to defense observers and intelligence agencies. One vessel frequently discussed in investigations was connected to broader concerns surrounding Russia's so-called shadow fleet. The shadow fleet refers to a loose collection of aging ships used primarily to bypass Western sanctions imposed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These ships often operate under obscure ownership structures, questionable insurance coverage, changing flags, and limited regulatory oversight. While originally associated mainly with sanctions evasion and oil transport, security experts now fear these vessels may also provide ideal cover for sabotage operations. The Baltic Sea incidents deepened those concerns. Ships connected to suspicious activity repeatedly appeared near critical infrastructure before disruptions occurred. In several cases, vessels reported engine failures. While positioned directly above communication cables or energy pipelines, observers noted that some ships drifted at extremely low speeds for prolonged periods without clear explanation. Maritime analysts argued that these patterns did not resemble normal navigation behavior. Instead, they resembled deliberate positioning operations. Investigative researchers and maritime intelligence groups carefully tracked these movements using open-source shipping data. They observed that some vessels slowed almost precisely while crossing major infrastructure corridors. In multiple incidents, the ships later resumed normal operations shortly afterward. To security officials, the timing appeared too convenient to dismiss entirely as random technical malfunction. This transformed what could have been isolated technical incidents into major geopolitical concerns. One particularly alarming case involved damage to the sea line communication cable connecting parts of Northern Europe. The cable represents a critical digital link supporting telecommunications, traffic between countries in the region. Investigators discovered suspicious vessel activity near the cable route before disruptions occurred. This reinforced growing fears that undersea infrastructure itself was becoming an active battlefield in modern hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare differs from traditional military conflict because it operates in ambiguity. Instead of open invasions or declared wars, states use cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, economic coercion, sabotage, proxy actors, intelligence operations, and infrastructure disruptions to weaken opponents while avoiding direct military confrontation. Undersea cable sabotage fits perfectly into this strategy because proving responsibility is extremely difficult. Even when suspicious behavior exists, definitive evidence linking a state directly to the act often remains elusive. This ambiguity benefits actors like Russia and China because it complicates Western responses. NATO may suspect sabotage, but military retaliation becomes politically difficult without absolute proof. Legal responses are equally complicated because most incidents occur in exclusive economic zones or international waters, where law enforcement authority is limited. As a result, hostile actors can exploit legal gray zones while maintaining plausible deniability. European governments increasingly believe this ambiguity is intentional. By operating below the threshold of open warfare, adversaries can apply constant pressure without triggering collective military responses. Damaging cables, disrupting energy systems, intimidating shipping lanes, and testing NATO reaction times all become tools in a larger strategic competition. The Baltic Sea therefore represents not just a regional security concern, but a preview of how future geopolitical conflicts may unfold globally. The timing of these incidents is also important. Europe remains deeply sensitive to infrastructure sabotage following the destruction of the Nord Stream sabotage pipelines. That event shattered assumptions about the safety of underwater infrastructure in European waters. Even today, definitive responsibility for the Nord Stream explosions remains politically contentious. Yet regardless of who carried out the attack, the psychological impact on Europe was enormous. European leaders realized that underwater infrastructure could be targeted with devastating consequences. Since then, every suspicious maritime incident receives intense scrutiny. Damage to telecommunications cables is particularly alarming because digital connectivity underpins modern economies. Financial markets, hospitals, government agencies, cloud services, logistics systems, military communications, and civilian internet access all rely on uninterrupted data transmission. A successful coordinated campaign against undersea cables could severely disrupt entire countries without firing a single missile. This vulnerability becomes even more concerning when viewed alongside China's expanding maritime ambitions. Beijing increasingly challenges existing maritime norms in regions like the South China Sea. Western officials worry that similar approaches could eventually extend into European waters through strategic partnerships, commercial influence, and gray zone operations. While China officially rejects allegations of sabotage involvement, growing suspicion in Europe reflects broader geopolitical mistrust between Beijing and Western governments. Meanwhile, Russia's strategic incentives are clearer. Moscow understands that NATO's technological societies depend heavily on interconnected infrastructure. By demonstrating that this infrastructure is vulnerable, Russia can create psychological pressure and strategic uncertainty. Even if no major damage occurs, the mere possibility of sabotage forces NATO countries to divert resources toward protection and surveillance. In strategic terms, this creates asymmetric pressure at relatively low cost. The problem for Europe is that defending underwater infrastructure is extraordinarily difficult. Thousands of kilometers of cables and pipelines stretch across vast maritime regions. Monitoring every section continuously is nearly impossible. Unlike military bases or airports, underwater infrastructure cannot easily be surrounded with fences or guards. Sabotage operations can be conducted quietly, remotely, and with little warning. This challenge explains NATO's growing emphasis on maritime surveillance and rapid response systems. The alliance understands that future conflicts may begin not with tanks crossing borders, but with invisible disruptions targeting infrastructure networks. A severed cable here, a disabled power connector there, a pipeline disruption elsewhere. Individually, these incidents may appear manageable. Collectively, they can erode public confidence, disrupt economies, and strain political unity. Legal limitations further complicate responses. International maritime law was designed primarily for traditional navigation disputes and peacetime commerce, not persistent gray zone sabotage campaigns. Coastal states possess limited enforcement authority in exclusive economic zones. They can monitor activity and investigate incidents, but arresting foreign vessels or proving sabotage often becomes legally difficult. Hostile actors exploit precisely these weaknesses. Even when vessels are detained, investigations frequently stall due to lack of cooperation from flag states or opaque ownership structures. This creates frustration among European governments, because suspicious activity may continue without meaningful accountability. Some analysts argue that adversaries intentionally exploit maritime law's limitations to operate aggressively while avoiding escalation into open conflict. The broader geopolitical implications are profound. For decades, globalization relied on assumptions that maritime trade routes and infrastructure would remain relatively secure. The modern economy depends on open seas, predictable shipping lanes, reliable telecommunications, and stable infrastructure. If those assumptions collapse, the consequences could reshape international commerce itself. Shipping insurers may raise premiums dramatically. Companies may avoid certain routes entirely. Governments may militarize infrastructure protection on an unprecedented scale. That is why the Baltic incidents matter far beyond Northern Europe. They represent an emerging global struggle over control, security, and vulnerability in the maritime domain. The conflict is not only about territory anymore. It is increasingly about networks, infrastructure, information systems, and economic connectivity. Whoever can threaten those systems gains enormous strategic leverage. Western officials therefore see the Baltic Sea not merely as a regional theater, but as a testing ground. Russia and China are believed to be observing NATO responses carefully. How quickly does the alliance react? How aggressively does it investigate? How united are member states politically? What legal mechanisms exist? What surveillance capabilities are available? Every incident provides intelligence value. For Sweden, Finland, and the Baltic states, the stakes are deeply personal. These countries sit directly on the front line of this new strategic competition. Their infrastructure, waters, and communication systems could become primary targets in any future escalation. That reality explains why Nordic governments increasingly support stronger NATO maritime coordination and infrastructure protection initiatives. Yet, despite rising tensions, Western governments remain cautious. Directly accusing major powers of sabotage carries enormous diplomatic and military consequences. Definitive evidence is difficult to obtain publicly. Therefore, NATO often responds through increased surveillance, infrastructure hardening, intelligence sharing, and deterrence messaging rather than direct confrontation. The strategy aims to raise the risks of sabotage without triggering uncontrolled escalation. Still, the atmosphere in the Baltic Sea has changed fundamentally. What was once viewed mainly as a commercial maritime zone is now increasingly treated as a contested, strategic arena. Every drifting ship, every damaged cable, every unexplained malfunction now feeds broader fears about hybrid warfare and strategic coercion. The underwater world beneath the Baltic has become a silent battlefield where cables carry not only data, but also the tensions of a rapidly changing geopolitical order.